On a Sunday morning, Valerie received a phone call from his mother. She considered 8 a.m. a perfectly reasonable time for a phone call, as she typically woke up no later than 6. Valerie took the call in another room to avoid waking up his wife. Valerie greeted his mother, and she immediately conveyed some unfortunate news. She informed him that William, his cousin, had been in an accident but was thankfully unharmed, with only a few scratches. However, the accident had caused significant damage to Eva, William's vehicle. To make matters worse, 2 or 3 strangers had demanded several million from him. Aunt Sveta, Valerie's mother's younger sister, was ultimately forced to sell her apartment to cover William's expenses, including the fine he had incurred. Aunt Sveta had 2 children, Natasha and William. Valerie pondered what mistakes Aunt Sveta might have made in raising her children. Natasha, instead of pursuing further education after school, had chosen to start a family and had already given birth to 7 children, 4 girls and 3 boys. Natasha's husband, Victor, had been in a constant search for employment, experiencing various misfortunes in each job. His salary had been reduced at some workplaces, and in his most recent job, he was unjustly burdened with debt. Throughout this challenging period, Natasha had been the sole breadwinner for the family. William was a young man of 23 who had been spoiled by his mother to an incredible degree. It remained a mystery to everyone how she managed to pamper him so much, especially given their constant lack of money. This irresponsible young man seemed to attract trouble and misadventures with remarkable regularity. They say that trouble followed him like water off a duck's back. William had a history of getting into all sorts of problems. His mother was always there to bail him out. William had been involved in 3 car accidents, all of which left other people's vehicles in ruins. His Ziguli car had turned 3 other people's Evas into scrap metal. As a result, his mother was forced to sell a 3-room apartment. It was a place where Aunt Sveta, Natasha, her husband, and their many children lived. Valerie couldn't fathom how they all fit into that apartment. Valerie questioned his mother about her intentions, to which she replied, well, maybe a year, 2, or 3. Valerie wasn't quite sure what she meant by a year, prompting her to clarify. She meant 1 year, but Valerie didn't quite understand the implication. His mother urged him to let them stay in their grandfather's house for a year to resolve their housing problems. Valerie pointed out that he had 7 more years of military service ahead, and if they stayed that long, they might become complacent and stop looking for a solution. He was familiar with Aunt Sveta and her family, and was concerned that they might take advantage of the situation if allowed to stay too long. Valerie nodded and acknowledged his mother's request. She reminded him to instruct Aunt Sveta and her family not to make any unauthorized changes to the house. If they damaged anything, they should be responsible for the repairs, and they must ensure that they pay their utility bills on time. His mother would check for any outstanding debts, and if she found any, she would evict them. His mother then brought up the dacha, recalling that she had sold it but mentioned that she could have gotten 5,000 to 7,000 more if Aunt Sveta hadn't stayed there with her grandchildren for 2 months before the sale. Valerie's mother then shifted the conversation to a more urgent matter. She informed him that she was about to start her military service in just 5 minutes, and explained that they needed his permission to register Arseny, Natasha's 3rd son, at their house. Arseny was going to start 1st grade at a nearby school, and the school required children to have a registered address with parents or legal guardians. They needed Valerie to agree to register Arseny because the school wouldn't accept children without such registration. Once Arseny completed 1st grade, they planned to move out of the house. Valerie's mother seemed persistent in her request for him to help Aunt Sveta's family, but he was clear in his decision. He mentioned that he had already quit his job and would be moving to a rented office apartment in a month. Valerie told his mother that he would inform Aunt Sveta to vacate the house by August 1. When his mother questioned where Aunt Sveta's family would go, he responded that buying an apartment wasn't an option for them, and no one would rent a place for 8 people. Valerie's mother then tried to argue that the house should go to Aunt Sveta and her children, mentioning some legal aspects. However, Valerie firmly defended his stance, emphasizing that his father had left the house to him, his son, and his grandchildren. He didn't see why he should give it away to Aunt Sveta's family. His mother mentioned that Aunt Sveta's family had looked after the house for 7 years and paid the communal services, but Valerie didn't seem convinced by this argument. He maintained his decision not to register Arseny or anyone else from Aunt Sveta's family in his house. The state of the house that Valerie and his family found was quite shocking. Everything was in disarray and disrepair. The front door had a broken lock, and the house was in complete disarray. Cabinet doors were torn off, and the cornice above the windows was damaged. The refrigerator was placed in the middle of the kitchen, and there was no sign of dishes or bed linen in the cabinets. Even the books from the grandfather's library were scattered on the floor. The plumbing was damaged to the point where it seemed like homeless people had been using it for the past 7 years. Valerie realized the extent of the damage that had been done to the house during Aunt Sveta's family's stay. It was clear that they had left the place in a terrible state, and Valerie was determined to restore it to its former condition. The situation was unraveling, and Valerie was determined to hold those responsible accountable. He called the police to document the damage to the house and its contents. Valerie also had a significant piece of evidence on his side: the photos he had taken of the house and its interior a year ago, when he initially considered selling it. These photos would help establish the condition of the house before the damage. The police began their investigation, talking to neighbors who witnessed the son-in-law of Aunt Sveta, Victor Gosdoder, tampering with the front door lock. They'd also noted that William and Natalia's eldest son had caused damage to the garden. Aunt Sveta and her relatives may have underestimated the consequences of their actions, but now they were being summoned for questioning as part of the investigation. It was difficult for them to explain the reasons for their hooligan actions. The expert, after studying the case materials, determined the damage caused as large as a result. The court ordered them to compensate for the damage, and each of them received a punishment of 2 years of correctional labor. For the men, Sveta's father and Natalia could receive fines of $150,000 each under this article and twice as much. But the court took into account the retirement age of one and now Aunt Sveta, who was proud that her pension was much less than that of many of her friends, received only a living wage. The rest was written off by bailiffs. Valerie estimated that relatives they will pay him off in about 10 to 12 years. He rented an apartment for the family and began to repair. Of course, one could not cope. They had to hire a team. But a month later, the family was able to move into a fully restored house. That's the story of Valeria's mother, and quarreled with Aunt Sveta. And where this family lives now, they do not know. But in this whole story, there is also something what is positive. William and Victor will definitely work for the next 2 years.